Hello, everyone, and welcome to Beginnings, the show that asks, where do creative people come from? My name is Andy. I'm the host of the show and a writer and performer based in Los Angeles, California. I laugh because I knew that as soon as I finished the standard sentence I say at the beginning of every one of these episodes, that I would then launch into my usual, how are you all doing? And the answer to that is, if you are an empathetic human, the answer is probably not great. Not great. So why don't I just dispatch with this, get into today's episode, because this is a really good one. This is Andrew Savage, and if you don't know who Andrew is, I'm going to read you his bio right now. Originally from Denton, Texas, musician and painter Andrew Savage began playing music seriously when he formed the band Teenage Cool Kids in college in 2006. By the time the group officially disbanded in 2011, Andrew had already been writing music in a new band, Parquet Courts, which he started with his college friend Austin Brown. Since that time, they've released 7 albums on labels like What's Your Rupture and Rough Trade, and Andrew was even nominated for a Grammy for Human Performance's artwork. Yes, he's a painter too, friends. As a solo artist, Andrew has released 2 albums, 2017's Thawing Dawn on his own label Dull Tools, I love that title, and his latest, Several Songs About Fire, which was just released on Rough Trade last week. It's great. I highly recommend you buy it. Yes, of course, buy the physical media. Buy it on Bandcamp. If you don't have the room in your house, just buy it. Put the money, folks. Put the money. If you have any kind of disposable income, put that money in the pockets of the artists whose work you like. Okay? Anyway, this interview was conducted on one of Andrew's press days, and it was, I think, the last one he did after a long day of talking to people. And I know if I had been in that position, whenever I've had to do press for something, it's usually like one interview, and then you have a couple days off or something like that. I've never had to promote a big project, but I think I would probably be an irritable person. But Andrew was lovely, was engaged. We really got into it about his childhood in Denton and the things that made him want to create. And I really enjoyed talking to him. I hope you enjoy listening to our chat. And if you do, and this is your first episode, and you're like, I like this, I should check out some other episodes. You know what? That's a great idea. What I like to do here in the beginning is a little recommended if you like. If you like my talk with Andrew, maybe you like my talk with other folks from the world of indie rock. Why, in fact, Andrew's bandmate Austin was on a live episode that I did. This used to be a live show that I did at UCB back in the day. He's on that, I think, even though that episode is from a decade ago. I bet it's pretty fun. Who else has been on the show that you might enjoy? Colin Newman from Wire, Sadie Dupuis of Speedy Ortiz, Francis Quinlan of Hopalong, Will Oldham, just talked to him. That was a really great episode. Rachel Brown from Water From Your Eyes, A.V. Tear, that was just a couple months ago. So check out those episodes if you like what you hear. Subscribe to the show, leave a review. I've been doing this for 14 years, just about. I've talked to hundreds of writers and actors and comedians and musicians and artists. So there's a little bit of something for everyone. You can follow me on social media. I mean, Twitter. I don't know why anyone goes on that anymore, but I'm on Blue Sky. I'm on Instagram if you want to see pictures of my wife and pets, at Andy Beckerman. And coming up, a lot of awesome episodes. Just talked to Marnie Stern. I talked to Will Butler. Those were really great talks, so look forward to those. But for now, let's talk to Andrew. My wife has to do press. She's an actress. She has to do press days where she sits in a room and then they bring in people either on Zoom or live.
Yeah, sometimes I do it. Sometimes I do it that way too. Yeah.
But you said the bar was set pretty high. What was in what way? Just so I know. And also, as a side question, what were you told about the show, or were you just told to like click on this link at a certain time?
Okay, both great questions. What makes a good interview? Well, I'm promoting a record right now, so if someone's heard the record and has an opinion on it, that's always a great start. you'd be amazed how many people have obviously not listened to whatever whatever record that you're promoting, and they ask just kind of, just very open questions like, so how is this record different from your last record? Or like, what was the process like? Something like that. And so I got like, people ask about, lyrics and stuff. That's always nice when there's like, okay, you've done your homework, that kind of thing. So that helps. And also, I mean, sometimes you get someone who it's really not their fault. They're a freelance writer and this has just been dropped in their lap day of, that is what it is. But sometimes you get those. And a lot of times people are honest about it. And you're just like, all right, well, let's, we got to do this today. So let's do it. And then, this podcast, I was told that what you like to talk about is, because it's called Beginnings, you like to talk about where people began creatively. Is that right?
Yeah, I think it's a fair childhood.
That's what I was told. And so that's what I've got a fairly good memory for that sort of thing, childhood. So I think I can navigate around that.
I am curious though, as having to answer kind of like bog standard questions, like, like, you like the A chord more than the D chord. Tell me about that. Do you just go on autopilot, or are you trying to stay present and hopefully trying to say something new to someone who is asking a question like that? I'm more curious about like your reaction to something in that.
That's the best case scenario is, you just kind of like cling on to a boring topic and try to, finesse it into an interesting answer as best you can. Because then hopefully some editor comes in and says, this was a bad question, but the answer's all right. So let's just massage the question a little bit now and make it seem more like a conversation. I've noticed that sort of thing happens sometimes.
The old reality massage.
Yeah.
Do you think it helps? Okay, I'm just like kind of stuck in this little area here, like doing this kind of press stuff. I'm always very curious, like, because when I read an interview and it is just a bog standard question, I just I like go to something else. There's too much in the world, and I'm wondering, like, what is the role now of like, this is, I feel like this show is different, but maybe that's just because I'm the one who created it and hosted.
Well, this show seems to have a very specific topic. Yeah. But I know what you mean. Like, what is the, when there's so much cultural coverage and when something, be it an album or a show or a opening or a novel or something, gets covered so much and the same questions are asked and answered over and over again, like, kind of what's the point? And I guess the answer in my case is like transparently, because the record label wants, to sell records and sell tickets to your concert. Really. I mean, that's kind of what it is. I mean, I do like, talking about what I do and, the art that I make with people who are interested in it. That I do get a kick out of that. But I mean, I get what you're saying. Like, sometimes things get covered, kind of ad nauseum, and then you get things like, 5 key takeaways from the new like Taylor Swift record, 10 things we learned from Secession, that kind of thing. And it's like, all right, I guess we learned those 10 things. Sure.
I guess more what I'm trying to get at, and I think this will nail it, is at what point do you think you gave yourself over to the process, knowing it is a necessary evil of making art in our nation, in our country, in our society?
I guess that would have happened probably around the time when someone other than me was releasing my music, which I guess that would have been when What's Your Rupture, the great record label What's Your Rupture, put out, or I should say re-released the Parquet Courts record Light Up Gold, because it was already out on my label Dull Tools. And when it's something like your own small DIY record label that's a project and not a business, then everything's a bit more low stakes. But when it's someone else like putting money into your art and promoting it and manufacturing, distributing it, then I guess unless you want to be a total dick, which I think it's good to get along with your record label, then you're kind of somewhat beholden to them. You need to, like, you know, they've put in a lot of time, like, and labor. Like right now I'm at Rough Trade headquarters right now in London. That's my record label. And most people have gone home, but all day this was filled with people who were working on my record. That's what their job is, you know? And so it kind of, I guess that would be when what you asked started, when I realized, okay, I need to do a little bit more here, because this is not just about the band. It's a little slightly bigger now.
Did you have any qualms about that? Was this difficult to swallow?
Yeah, for sure. It was a big, just from like kind of the musical world that I came from before that, it was a learning curve that took years to get around to, because yeah, I guess I came from this mentality, money equals bad, you know, careerism, professionalism equals the devil kind of thing. And so there was a series of fights put up until it kind of dawned on me that, you know, well, what I do is labor, and I am in an industry, and then what other people do for my art is labor, and that labor, I guess, needs to be respected somewhat. And you don't do it, you know, you don't do everything, because an important part of kind of growing in, you know, I guess the music industry or art or entertainment or whatever you want to call it, is learning what to say no to. That's very important. But it's also not saying no to everything, you know, as nice as that might be sometimes, you know?
Yeah. I think there was like a big sea change when I was in college. Mm-hmm. It was, and this is the late 90s. It was this kind of mentality of you can't sell out. You're like, the 90s were very much about this idea of quote unquote selling out. Now that didn't ever take into account whether the person who is not selling out had money for some reason, either like, you know, from another job or from their parents or whatever like that. It didn't take class things into account. But then there was a sea change, and there's also, like, I know for me, I had to go through this whole kind of thing in my head where I'm like, to do the thing I love, I necessarily have to. I mean, I'm a TV writer. Like, I necessarily have to work with giant corporations.
Yeah,
like, it's not rough. Like, Rough Trade would be a wonderful company to work with versus like places I won't name because I have to sell to them, so I won't name check them. But
it's funny. Yeah, I do, because that sea change was just a different economic reality. The 90s were a prosperous time, and you could be a independent artist and still, for example, make money off of CD sales, which you really, like, that doesn't really happen anymore. And so the mentality changes, and now, like, it's, you know, in a way, I look back on it a bit fondly, because I was definitely of that mentality once upon a time. And it's like, people believe in something. People have a line in the sand when it comes to culture, you know? But things are just different now. And the way that people interact and consume art is different. And the way that, like, money moves through it is very different. And so it's just a different economic reality. And people that work in, you know, that make money off of their art are just facing a different reality. And so for that reason, that attitude has shifted. And I think that someone who's young now and is, you know, maybe when they were, you know, maybe an aspirational thing for them was to be, I don't know, an influencer or something. That would be a very foreign mentality to someone. I think now, I can remember it, so can you, but I think even maybe the concept of selling out might just be kind of completely foreign to someone now.
Your parents, I don't know if they still work in a newspaper, but they were newspaper people.
Yeah, that's true.
When you were growing up.
Yeah.
I mean, my only knowledge of like working at newspapers from watching The Wire or reading like some David Simon or something like that. I'm curious, and it seems like there's a certain mentality that comes with like maybe like a little bit of an oppositional kind of feeling. And I'm curious if your parents had that. I mean, your mom, I think, art director, if I remember reading it correctly, but
she was in the art department. My father was in the sports department. Yeah, I guess that mentality would be something of like kind of something similar to The Show Must Go On, because, at the end of the day, a newspaper has to get made. And I guess a lot like, doing art, be it, music that's on a record label or, a play that has a crew or a concert or whatever, it kind of takes a village. It's like kind of like a team effort, of these different departments and different specialties. So that's probably the mentality that like, that this thing has to happen no matter what, there's no reality where this newspaper can't come out, Do
you think you caught that as a kid? Like caught a whiff of that? I guess what I mean, like psychically caught a whiff of that.
I definitely did. Yeah, I definitely did get a sense of kind of work ethic from them for sure. And that's, I think I do have a bit of that mentality in my music. I mean, I definitely heard the word like deadline a few times, from them working in that world. So that's something that that was a reality that I was aware of, I guess, by an early age, is, that you have to fulfill this thing that you need to do. And I guess maybe that's influence. I guess I feel like I've had a fairly prolific output so far, and maybe that, maybe it's to do with that.
I mean, when you say you have a prolific output, I mean, you do, but I mean, is it generated internally? Is it like, I have these ideas and they have to get out? Is it generated externally where, well, it's the album cycle, I have to put out an album, and so I better generate ideas? Or, I mean, obviously it could be many things, like some kind of interplay between those or something completely else. But is it something
if anything, it's the first, because I don't think in terms, when I'm making music, I definitely don't think in terms of album cycles. Obviously you want to have the space to, tour, but also, Parquet Courts was pretty much in a constant state of touring from 2013 up to the pandemic. So I never really thought of what we were doing as having to do with an album cycle. We were just always touring and kind of always making music too. So no, and I there were definitely times when, people at the label have, kind of been like, well, slow down. We're still working on this thing, whereas, I admire someone like Ty Segall for, putting out like 2 records every year. I've only done that. Parquet Courts has only done that once or twice, I think. But, that is kind of the pace I would like to work at. But I also, I also do visual art and I also paint. And so, I need to make space and time for that too. And so that's kind of what happens when I'm not touring or recording music.
Are you logical or rational about it? Like, I need to do that. Here's the idea that's in my head, and I'm going to set aside this amount of time, or I'm going to do this or that. Or is it more like a kind of like compulsion where it's just like, I have to get this out of me or else I'm going to lose my mind?
Well, it's definitely that. Because that's just, I don't know any artist that doesn't have that. You have to at least have that. But if you're going to be a creative person, I think you have to set up your life. You have to live the life of an artist. And so that means you have to set up your life so that you do have space to do this thing. And you have to set it up so that when inspiration comes, you are prepared for it and you're ready for it. So, yeah, for example, I carry around a little book that you can see right here because we're on a video call. I carry around this. It's in my pocket at all times, or some version of this. I fill them up pretty quickly, and then I reference them. And so I'm, when inspiration comes, I'm prepared for it. But also, I have a studio, and I have a space, and I make time. I mean, I don't know, as life gets busier and busier, you kind of have to make that time and plan out, okay, I'm going to make some space to do this thing. And even if nothing fruitful comes out of it, at least I've done something. That's what you have to set up your life so that you have a pattern and you fall into a sort of muscle memory of creation. Because if you wait just for inspiration to strike, then that kind of makes the moment, it kind of makes the eureka moment this very high stakes thing,
Did you see your parents act like this when you were young? Like, I understand like being a reporter is a little different than, you don't necessarily generate ideas from inside your head, but did you see them set aside time to work on their craft when you were younger?
Yes. So, my mother, she would paint as well. And I mean, she was pretty crafty. She would make paper mache sculptures, and she was a very good illustrator. And I should speak in the present tense because she's still with us, and I know she still does things like this. But she draws, she paints, she makes things, and that's that's an impulse that she has, and it's nobody sees it really. She doesn't have an Instagram, or she doesn't show things. She's not a professional artist, but she does have the artistic urge of this is inside me and it needs letting out, and she did. Yes. I witnessed her make space for that. And I guess it was a good thing to see because it was not something that it wasn't a means to a financial end. It was purely an artistic statement, and so that was cool to see. I mean, my dad was a sports writer, and so therefore watched a lot of sports. So he would have done that anyway, I guess. But I mean, yeah, he made time to, I went to a lot of games growing up.
Do you ever have an emotional reaction to any of your mom's art when you were growing up that you can remember at least?
Oh yeah, surely. Yeah. I mean, I remember her drawing these beautiful portraits, one of me, one of my brother. And yeah, that was a very heartfelt and tender thing that she did. And so that was very emotional. That, and she liked to, she was a dog obsessive. We had so many dogs growing up. And so she drew the dogs, and she drew other people's dogs. If she met an animal and she fell in love with an animal, she would draw a picture of, the dog or the cat and give it to that person, which I think is a very sweet thing. I mean, when I was young, when you're young, you don't know if your parents are normal or not. They just are. They just are them. But when I look back on it, and I'm an adult now, and I'm an artist now, and I just think, yeah, that's a very sweet thing. That's a sign of a person with a big heart.
Did you like sports before your dad, took you to games or watched stuff with him?
Yes, absolutely.
Is that just a Texas thing, or?
Well, I mean, no, clearly not. I mean, tell that to a Oakland Raiders fan, like, no, not just a Texas thing. Well, I guess they're the Vegas Raiders now, aren't they? No, it's not. But I mean, okay. So, I was growing up in the 90s when basketball fandom was, at a huge high that was just culturally so huge, that, even like minor players were household names, my father's one of those guys that talks about baseball like it's ballet or something, and so I just kind of grew up hearing, talk about baseball. And also, when I was a kid, the Dallas Stars came down from Minnesota. They were the Minnesota North Stars, which is cruel if you're a fan of Minnesota hockey, because why the fuck would the ice hockey team go to Texas? But, their loss was our gain because the Mighty Ducks, had come out. And so kids all over were really hockey curious. And then a guy comes to our school and he's like, there's an ice rink now, and you can come skate on it. And, if you can even play on a hockey team if you want. And so we were all just like, fuck yeah. And so we all went and took the skating classes, and then joined the hockey team, and we're terrible at it, except for the coach's kid who was Canadian. He was great, but I mean, we were just miserable. But then in '96, the Stars won the Stanley Cup in like a triple overtime. And then Pantera wrote a song about it, and there was a parade, and it was a big deal. And so, yeah, that was just, it was just kind of like right time. But I grew up playing baseball. My dad coached the teams that I was on. And so, I was pretty devoted to sports and the Cards and watching them, and until music came along, I guess.
Do you think you would have, this is a counterfactual, but do you think that would have been a direction, you would have wanted to play baseball or try to pursue that as a career if music hadn't entered your life?
No. I was no athlete. It was just a thing, it's just a thing you did, when you were a kid, something to do, because otherwise I would have been watching TV, and I liked it. And I guess, youth sports at the beginning, anyway, when the kids are young, not everyone's in it because, for love of the game. They're just in it because, your dad drove you there, basically. Right. But I guess when it became clear to me that, okay, I'm getting interested in rock music, and that's kind of the opposite of being a jock, I needed to pick a side. It was no question. There was no deliberation. It was just like, cool, guitars. Yeah, I'll do that.
I asked this, there's two things. One, the first is there isn't a huge intersection between indie rock and sports. Pittsburgh and I guess Texas. Pittsburgh, everyone, whether you were a crust punk or whatever, loved the Steelers, right? And so that mentality infected the entire city, regardless of what subculture you were in. Sharpling, I see Tom Sharpling. There's an intersection there, and I guess you maybe Texas in general. Maybe there's just certain geographic areas. That's why I was interested in that. The other thing is, it feels to me, and maybe I'm wrong about this, but if you play sports, it can't help but give you some kind of self-awareness about who you are as a person, because it's very easy to know whether you are good or not. Right.
Yeah.
And you have to, and maybe I'm being maybe this is a little too psychologically deep for what it is. But it seems like if you have to play and you're playing week by week, like I just played basketball with my friends, and that was or football, you know, and it was fun. But like I was very aware that I'm small. I was very aware that if I get the ball and I don't run fast enough, I'm going to get tackled pretty badly.
Yeah.
Right, things like that. And it gave me some kind of like at least bodily self-awareness. And I'm curious if it gave you any self-awareness about yourself.
Yeah, I realized that I don't like to run at all. That's never been like a fun thing for me. But I guess there have been times where I felt strong. Like in baseball, I was pretty good at just like, you know, whacking a ball really hard. But wasn't great at running. But if you know anything about baseball, running's not really a big part of it. You know, like it's kind of a lot of, you know, chunky guys that are just kind of trotting around. There's strong dudes, you know.
Did it give you anything deeper though? Or was it just well, I know that I can't run fast. And the reason I'm asking, I was like, do you think, again, another counterfactual, but like if you had been good at running, would you, would rock and roll, would playing the guitar have been, and I don't know how you really answer that. I'm just kind of curious as a prompt.
Well, I think no, because I don't really have the style of competitive edge that an athlete does. Like that's a specific type of being competitive. And, you know, there's competition in, you know, being in a band, I guess. You know, you want to be really good, better than others. But there's a specific type of competitive edge that an athlete possesses that I just don't. So I think I realized witnessing it in other kids and not seeing it in myself that it wasn't in my nature.
You don't have that fire. Like sometimes, like, even though I know that creativity and making things is not a contest, there is some fire in me if someone else gets a thing that I coveted.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I got into skateboarding, and that appealed to me more because it was not a team thing. Not that a team thing is bad, but like you're kind of just pushing yourself to like learn a trick or to like, you know, build up the cojones to like jump off a thing. And it's not like it's not really like you're trying to compete with somebody other than just yourself, or maybe like impress your friends a little bit. So, you know, I do have somewhat of a competitive edge, but not the kind that an athlete would have, or someone who would even consider being an athlete.
That's good. No, it breeds bitterness in me. It's very, it's a positive thing for you. Did you engage with this stuff emotionally when you were younger, or
with what
was
stuff?
All the things we've been talking about, whether it's sports, whether it was your mother making art or seeing your parents, you know, I asked that general question because I was a very emotional kid, and that at some point it was a little too embarrassing to be that emotional, and I kind of packed it down up until I got into therapy in my late 20s. And you know, just us talking for a little while, you seem like a rational person, or someone who understands or controls their emotions. And I'm wondering if that was the same way when you were a kid.
You know, I think about seeing one of my earliest like memories of like art, I guess, would be watching the music video for Like a Prayer by Madonna. And I can remember other songs from childhood, but I remember that music video making me really feel like several different ways that were conflicting. Because are you familiar with the video?
What's in my head right now is Material Girl, so I don't know if I...
So it's Madonna, and she is in she's in kind of a country chapel from the outside, but inside it's a elaborate Catholic cathedral, which that's not too dissimilar to the November Rain video by Guns N' Roses, which was also had a huge impact on me as well. But there's a lot of imagery in it. Like Madonna is in this gorgeous, really slinky Dolce & Gabbana dress, and there is a gospel choir, And but there is also her love interest, her boyfriend in the video is a black man who begins the video as a statue, comes to life, and then we also see his persecution at the hands of, I guess, what we assume are these sort of, Southern thugs, small town white thugs. And then you see burning crosses. So you go between, the horniness of the dress and then the fear of watching this guy get, pestered for being black, but then the joy of the gospel choir and her dancing with the gospel choir. But then there's the burning crosses. And I just had so many questions. I had so many questions, like why is her boyfriend becoming a statue again? Like, why are the white guys being mean? Why are the crosses on fire? And why is she so sexy? I didn't really know what sexy was, but I remember feeling a lot of different things from that video and just kind of being in awe of it. It might be my first memory of like really being in awe of something that I saw. And to this day, I love the song. I do it on karaoke, not infrequently. And, I just had a lot of questions about it. And I like asking people, like, what is their first memory of like having a favorite song, like realizing that one song could be your favorite, I remember liking She Drives Me Crazy by Fine Young Cannibals, but it wasn't my favorite because I didn't, I probably ranked it alongside, Jingle Bells, Batman Smells or something. And I'm like, both great tunes. But, I think maybe when I was listening, because I was really into the radio when I was a kid, and that's what led me to rock music. But before that, I would listen to the radio and just, be like, when are they going to play Like a Prayer again? My mom would be like, probably in the next, 30 minutes to an hour, because it's a very popular song. But I remember that being like the first time I was like, this song is better than others.
It's so interesting. I was so scared of the erotic as a kid, or so ashamed, maybe. I don't know what the emotion is actually. But I remember I forbid, at my bar mitzvah, I was like, they cannot play any Madonna. There's no, because she is too lascivious. And and my parents are like, all right, I guess.
Oh, wow. So you were kind of a prude.
100%.
Okay, got it.
No, my speed was like, I think my version of that, which is not as interesting, is the Call Me Al video for Paul
great
Simon.
Video. Yeah, amazing video. Great video. And that was that one made an impression on me too, because, obviously I knew Chevy Chase, but I was just baffled by the fact that Paul Simon's lips weren't moving, but he was obviously singing it, but Chevy's were. And I was like, how the fuck did they do that? Because of course I thought all videos were live performances too, And so I was like, how did they pull that one off?
Yeah, it was really confusing to me because I didn't understand. I think this is when I was a very small child, that people from one thing, I didn't understand the act of acting. And I just knew that people like this guy that I've seen in Three Amigos is now this thing, and he's the singer. And but then my first concert, my parents took me to, we saw Paul Simon on the Graceland tour at Hershey Park.
Oh, cool.
And so I knew that it was a very confusing soup in my mind until I eventually figured it out.
Yeah.
And that was a lot of my childhood, was this, or of my early childhood, was this confusion of like, how does this work? How are these meta levels interacting with each other?
That's kind of the thing that makes it magical,
Yeah. Up until I became a philosophy professor and I was like, oh, this is how it works. All right. The magic's ruined. So you said that listening to the radio was kind of your pathway into rock and roll. At what point, though, was it something where you said to yourself, oh, this is a thing that I want to make, as opposed to something I just want to consume?
I think it was, I guess the first time I was like, okay, yeah, I want to make something like this was, probably the Beatles. And because that's the first time I'd ever questioned maybe the personalities behind a band. And like, I liked it so much that I was like, well, what are these guys like? And luckily there was no shortage of lore around the Beatles, so I could kind of dig into that. But, they were gone by that point. John Lennon was dead. Like, so I had this band that was my favorite band that I loved that wasn't going to be making any new stuff anytime soon. So I think it has to be Smashing Pumpkins, followed pretty shortly by Oasis, that were like my first two bands that I looked forward to the CD coming out, and Smashing Pumpkins ended up being my first concert on the Melancholy tour. And that was pretty life-changing. And I think it was the visual elements around it too. It was like all those videos, especially for that record, were so like kind of pregnant with visual meaning, like the Tonight video, which is this kind of, very like ornate like thing. Like, people don't make videos like that anymore, but I just thought it was so compelling. And then, with, it was also like kind of my first exposure to like heavy music, because they got pretty heavy. I mean, especially what my impression of what heavy was kind of blew me away. And then, Oasis, they just seemed like the coolest people in the world, kind of, and like made these great melodies. And they kind of looked like the Beatles a little bit, but modern, which I appreciated. And had, it was just, I was just obsessed with Definitely Maybe and Morning Glory. And then just listening to the radio and kind of hearing these bands, and just, for that reason, I kind of miss the radio. I mean, it's still there, but the I guess the age of radio audience skews a little bit older now, because you had to, like, for every Nine Inch Nails and Oasis, there was a, like, Toad the Red Sprocket or whatever that you had to, no shade on them, but you had to take the good with the bad, and
whatever the radio hit was, I remember liking when I was younger.
What's that?
Whatever Toad the Wet Sprocket's radio hit was, I remember enjoying it when I heard it when I was a kid.
Like I said, no shade. That's just like that's just the first band I could think of that I could probably take or leave at that age. So, I mean, that was a huge part of in like getting into rock music. And then MTV for sure, Beavis and Butthead, found out about a lot of stuff through that show. Even though they were making fun of everything, it was like, that seems like it might be kind of cool. And then I can remember being at Blockbuster Video, you'll recall, and I was in the special interest section of Blockbuster Video. Did you ever browse that department in Blockbuster?
Ours did not have a special interest. It was,
I bet it,
pretty pedestrian.
I bet it did, because it was a small section. It was just like, kind of wedged between horror and baseball bloopers videos, probably. It was like that's where like the concert videos were, and I saw a tape that was 1991, the year punk broke, and I knew Nirvana. I liked Nirvana, but I didn't know Sonic Youth. And I took that home, and after that, Sonic Youth was my favorite band. And the first band that I ever performed in when I was 14, we covered Moat by Sonic Youth, which was a very proud thing for me. And there was also, do you remember there was a Simpsons episode, Homer Palooza?
Yep.
And that had Nine Inch Nails, who were also a huge band for me at that time. And it had Smashing Pumpkins, and it had Sonic Youth all in it. And so yeah, I guess I knew of Sonic Youth before I watched that tape because they were Simpsons approved, which meant, cool. Homer hangs out with them. But that's what and that led me to so much. I mean, once I found Sonic Youth, that opened up a huge world to me because it's such a long career. There's so many references. There's so many things to dig into there. And, fast forward a few decades and, Parquet Courts got a chance to, we covered Moat and Lee joined us on stage and he sang it and, played guitar with us. And that was a big deal for me because he was, kind of that song, that album was huge for me. And that was a big, because I saw that tape of Blockbuster and it said Nirvana on the cover. I was like, cool, Nirvana, punk, nice, I'm sold.
Yeah. Yeah. I think there are bands, I'm just making this term up right now. I'm going to call them keyhole bands.
Yeah.
But there are just experiences in general where you have this critical mass of stuff that starts building up in you, of experiences, of artistic experiences, of just, listening to certain things or watching certain things. And at some point, there's some experience that unlocks a new world that if you hadn't had that critical mass, you may not have gone through the door. Again, this metaphor is very shaky because I'm just coming up with it. But I do think about these critical mass, you had a spark in you, but if you hadn't had this critical mass, it might not have ignited. Not to turn this into a nuclear metaphor, but do you know what I mean?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I knew that punk in theory was cool. I knew that it was a thing that one should get around to. And I liked Nirvana and I associated punk, which, it wasn't till a few years later when that became the most important thing of my life and eclipsed everything else. But I knew vaguely at that age that it was cool, anti-authority, whatever, guitar is loud. But when I saw Sonic Youth and heard Sonic Youth, it didn't fit any preconceived notion of what punk was in my head. There were no mohawks. It wasn't fast necessarily. And that was like a brief moment of disappointment followed by an intense moment of curiosity because I was like, well, okay, then, so what is it? And then it just got me it just made me really dive in and I got the CD Goo and just kind of went from there.
How did your parents react as you moved further away from sports and into skating and rock and roll?
Well, they're both big fans of music. And so I think that they probably, they didn't love it all. I think that they probably, were glad that I was becoming interested in something, but didn't necessarily get it. It wasn't their thing. And my mother was a real doctrinaire believer in the parental advisory sticker, which I guess we have Tipper Gore to thank for. And so that turned me to a life of crime pretty early on. And luckily, the look then was an XL t-shirt, no matter what size boy you were, and cargo shorts, which was kind of the perfect vehicle to make out with a CD in one of those gigantic clamshell kind of things that they used to be in. And so I would go to whatever the CD store was, I can't remember, and then kind of go out with
coconuts.
Go out, yeah, sure. Go out with Blood Sugar Sex Magic in my cargo short pocket, hidden by my massive 1990s XL shirt for a 90-pound boy, and then go home to the garage and just take a hammer to that silly plastic thing and then hide it because for some reason, and I wasn't alone. I remember at that CD store, my mom being like, so you want to get what? And I was like, I want to get Closer by Nine Inch Nails. And she was like, "What's your favorite song on the CD?" And I said, The Downward Spiral. And she was like, "What's your favorite song?" And I said, "It's got to be Closer, you know." And I had no idea what the lyrics were. I wasn't paying attention to the lyrics then. And this was the kind of store that I guess that had a liberal policy of letting people open up the CD and inspect the lyrics before purchase. So that's what she did. And she flipped straight to Closer. And then maybe it was 3.5 seconds that she goes, "Yeah, we won't be buying this," to the clerk. And then she was like, I read the lyrics to that song. I just think that's so disgusting, you know? And so of course I went back and stole the shit, you know, because I just needed it. I didn't want it. I needed it. I needed to have that song. I needed to have it in my life more often than MTV and the radio could provide. And I was going to get that shit no matter what. So I went and I stole it.
Was this a religious thing that she was against it?
No, not necessarily. I think it was just this was like, this was when parents were freaking out about, Guns N' Roses and Marilyn Manson. And like, there was just like, I'm not bitter about it. She was just trying to be a good parent and, control the media that goes in and out of her house.
Sure.
And so like, I'm not bitter about it. I guess maybe I'm more bitter towards, the PMRC for like even introducing the censorship at all, because it's not like she inspected every lyric of every CD that came through the front door. But if it had that sticker on it, that was a sign that this was bad boy stuff,
I guess what I was trying to figure out is, are you growing up in a space where you are reacting to some kind of like conservative, and I don't even necessarily mean that politically, but just like a more conservative vibe that you are pushing against? Or is it just like, I don't know. I don't know if my parents looked at my Nine Inch Nails CDs or anything like that. Like I grew up in a somewhat liberal, like as long as nothing was, they were fine with swear words. I think as long as it wasn't like super inappropriate that they didn't let me.
Yeah. Same, more or less the same. I guess there just had to be some, line of what to accept and not to accept. And then the industry kind of gave parents that. They were like, here's the line. It's this sticker.
I guess why I was trying to figure that out is I'm like, it's in my mind. Again, this is from, 45 minutes of talking. But like you go from baseball playing, in my mind, you're like this clean cut baseball playing kid. And then suddenly you're skating, you're stealing CDs. You're listening to Red Hot Chili Peppers and their erotic funk punk.
I'm smoking cigarettes and marijuana. And eventually I take LSD at age 13. So yeah, I'm figuring out how to be a bad boy. When I realized there was an option to rebel, I went for it, basically.
What was the appeal of that when you were younger? Because it scared me. Doing that kind of stuff, I was just like, not for me.
I guess the appeal was just, needing like desperately to make myself somewhat distinct from everybody else in that sort of urgent way that you kind of only have when you're young. And to have something that was, because I couldn't talk to guys that played sports about Oasis or Nine Inch Nails or Sonic Youth. Like I had to go to the kids who smoke cigarettes in the ditch before school to talk about, quote unquote, alternative rock music, so I just like kind of, I went where the wind blew, and that to me, the wind was blowing me towards all that stuff. Rock and roll, skating. And I guess with that came this sort of, this was before, skating occupied a different place in the cultural imagination than it does now. It was kind of a bad boy thing to do. It was, you weren't like the other ones if you skated, it set you apart, at least in the environment that I was in.
Yeah. No, in my fairly white Pennsylvania suburbs, the skaters were the ones the cops went after.
Yeah,
And
sure.
yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So I guess what I'm trying to figure out is, did you actually like this kind of, I'm going to call it bad boy persona? And I don't really,
Mhm.
I don't really mean that necessarily, but just as a way of referencing it. Did it actually mean something to you, or was it a means to an end? You're like, I want to talk about this music, because it seemed like the music, like you said, stealing, like you needed to hear Closer more
Mm.
often than it was available to you. Like that to me is like this kind of like spark, this compulsion that's in you. You're like, I need to hear this. And was the bad boy persona something you actually liked, or was it just like, well, these are the people where I can actually who will actually listen to me and have opinions about this stuff. And so to be part of that subculture means I need to necessarily take on these other aspects of it.
Well, I think it kind of came at the same time as a realization that a lot of things are bullshit. Like school, I realized kind of maybe as soon as I entered junior high that it was just kind of bullshit and I hated it. Uh, and so, and then, yeah, other things like, because that's the age when you start to define yourself by what you like and what you're into. And I just couldn't relate to wanting to make good grades. It wasn't important to me. And I mean, the school I went to was fucking piss poor anyway. So it's, it was more kind of just babysitting and, keeping kids out of trouble. And I guess it was probably the first time I kind of was acquainted with the idea of conformity, and that I didn't want to be that. And so it was just, those were kind of the tools I was given to not be a conformist. That was the route that I saw. Once I got to junior high and there were older kids there, I saw kids who were into alternative rock and metal and punk, and that I was like, that's more for me. And so, you make new friends, and then you kind of drift away from the old friends, and so you drift into a new crowd, and this crowd's into, they do drugs, and they like to drink beers, and they like to steal cigarettes from ashtrays and smoke the rest of them and shit. And so that was just, it was a time in my life, and I think this is just part of adolescence, when you realize that some things are bullshit and you react to that in a certain way. And so my reaction was, I'm going to go with the quote unquote nonconformists.
We're right at the very end, and I guess I'll just, one more question.
Yeah.
This coincided with you moving to Dallas, right? Because you moved from Denton to Dallas.
Yeah.
Around when you, I don't know, tween, somewhere around there. I can't remember exactly.
Yeah.
Was that a disruptive move? Was that a chance for you to take on a new persona?
Yeah, I guess a bit, because Dallas, it was a much bigger city than Denton, which you wouldn't call it a suburb of Dallas, although it's a college town, the interesting thing was I ended up going back to Denton because, well, I went to school there, and I got, some scholarship money to go there, but also because when I was growing up, that's where the cool shows were, because that's where the college kids were. And it's different now, but then bands didn't play Dallas. They played Denton. So I ended up going back there because I thought it was cooler. But when I moved when Dallas was it was more people. I went to a massive school, a massive junior high, that just had a ton of different people. And Denton was also pretty, white. Dallas was not. It was super diverse. Lots of Latin American kids, and just lots of different types of people, and things that come with a city. I guess it felt maybe a little bit more cosmopolitan, which is a word I would never apply to Dallas now, but Yeah, that was part of it for sure.
I mean, what prompted the move? Did your parents get a new job or something?
Yeah, that was what it was.
Okay, this is the last question.
Sure.
When did this stuff settle in you? You know, when did you actually decide, you know, it's not just a spark. You didn't just like rock music. You didn't just like this bad boy persona rebelling because things were bullshit. It was actually something that you wanted to express.
What do you mean? Because it was always something that I wanted to express.
But there's a point where, like, I mean, I loved Pavement, and then there was a point where it just burst out, and I'm like, I want a guitar. Like, it changed from something that like I loved to something I wanted to do.
It was that. I mean, that also came fairly early. It was when I was 13. I got wind of a punk fanzine called Maximum Rock and Roll. And I learned about it through a liner notes where it was thanked. And I guess I must have gone to the school library to use the computer, and I looked it up, and I found an address in San Francisco that I wrote to and said, "Do you still exist?" And they said, "Yes, we do." And I must have come off like a kid because they just sent me an issue. And I then subscribed to it, and then, started getting it in the mail. And that's when it became clear to me that there was a network of music that was happening that was different from the stuff on the radio and on MTV, and that felt vital. That felt really vital because there was anger and there was righteousness in it, and it was punk, but it was not punk as I had defined it. It wasn't blue hair and shit like that. It was just like, it felt real, and it was in my hands, and it was written by people that used language that was very familiar to me. And it was like, all these ads that said, send $3 cash for a 7-inch, and you'd send it, and then like a month or something later, like a 7-inch would come back in the mail. And that's when I realized, okay, now I'm in this. I've drank the Kool-Aid. This is a thing that I'm a part of. And so I'm going to start a punk band, and we're going to play shows. And I'm going to, eventually I'm going to put out a record, and then I'm going to go on tour. Now the record came, I was in high school and I had a hardcore band that put out a record, but the tour thing didn't happen till later with a band called Teenage Cool Kids that I had when I was in Denton in my early 20s in college. And it was that tour, to bring it full circle, it was that tour that I went on to where I was like, okay, I'm addicted to this. This is what I want my life to be. And I don't care if I have to, work at Target or whatever. Like, I will do this, like, by any means necessary. And I guess it just showed me that it could be done and that anyone can do it. And once I started doing it, I was like, well, let's do it again. And that's just kind of been my life ever since then. And now I you have to really bring it full circle. Now I'm in a band with a record label, and people promote what I do, and there's money to be made in touring, which was at one time just a total pipe dream. But really, since that first tour, I haven't really stopped. And I guess, so now we're going close to like 20 years now. So yeah, that it would have been something like that.
Andrew, thank you so much for joining, especially knowing that this is the last interview for a long press day. I appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Hey, absolutely, Andy. Thanks for making it interesting for me. This was really fun.
Yeah, of course. And we'll see you next time. Bye.
Bye, oh, bye, oh, bye, oh, bye, oh, bye, oh, bye.